We're in Genesis 48 tonight. I'm going to ask you two different questions to hopefully help us to connect to this passage a little bit. Put us in the mindset to understand it. Genesis 48. First question is, what favorite memory do you have about your grandparents? You have a favorite memory of your grandparents? Sugar cookies? Really? Yeah. Very nice. Other favorite memories? Okay. Real lemon. Nice. Yep. Very cool. Sin? Okay. Okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Oh, Sinson. Yeah, sure. Never had it. Yeah. Gee, I remember my grandparents, they were watching us one night, and they gave us black licorice. I did not like black licorice. Maybe my taste buds have changed. Your taste buds are supposed to change like every 7 years or something. So maybe I'll like it now. I don't know. Find out. Taffy with your grandma? Yeah. On my dad's side, used to play Mancala with my grandma all the time. I don't know if she ever let me win. I don't remember winning or losing. I just remember playing it. In fact, I think the Mancalas that we have at home might have been a gift from her. In fact, I'm fairly certain it is. On my mom's side, yeah, my grandma always gave us cookies, so that was always fun, Oreo cookies. Sometimes when you went back there, those cookies were stale, and so you just threw them all away and said we needed more cookies, and so she'd always open up a new pack. And my parents always said you could have two, but if there was no one back there looking, then you would stuff a few in your mouth and walk out with two. I'm sure they saw my mouth like that and knew. My grandpa, on my mom's side, loved to laugh and he loved to play tricks on people. He would take his tape measure and, he'd extend it all the way out when someone wasn't looking and scratch their ear until finally they, would turn around and all you would hear is this tape measure rolling back into into place. Good memories, right? Good memories. So here's a different question. Are you a lefty or a righty? Lefty? You're a lefty? I didn't know that. Left, yeah. Any ambidextrous? Ambidextrous? I say that I'm weird because I will write with my right, and I'm right-eye dominant. I didn't know that until maybe a few years ago, but I'll write with my right. I'll shoot with my right, bow and arrow, gun, shoot with my right. But I'll bat left, I'll throw left, I'll golf left. I don't know what it is. I learned, all your sports, sir. Yeah. So we're very much alike, yeah. My, do you know what a trap set is? Like a set of drums that you sit down and play? So I learned to play that both right-handed and left-handed. My brother Andrew, he's my oldest brother, he's completely left-handed, and so he had his trap set up left-handed. And I'm right-handed when it comes to playing the trap set, but if I ever wanted to sit down and play his, I had to learn how to do it left-handed, so I learned how to do both. Anyways, so there you go. Hopefully those two questions just give us a little bit of connection to this chapter. We're nearing the end of Genesis. I know most of you are thinking to yourself, hallelujah, because we started it when I first got here 3 years ago. But this chapter specifically, we are nearing the end of Jacob's life. We don't know exactly how much time has passed since the end of chapter 47, but it seems like there is a flow from chapter 47 through chapter 49, that it happens in quick succession. So I wouldn't read years in between each chapter. At most months, if not days, and really even hours could have happened between 47 and 49, especially between 48 and 49, as we'll see later. But in this chapter, we're going to see Jacob blessing Joseph's two sons. So let's read through Genesis 48. This is what it says. After this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession.' And now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. As for me, when I came from Padan, to my sorrow Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, 'Who are these?' Joseph said to his father, 'These are my sons, whom God has given me here.' And he said, 'Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them.' Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, 'I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also.' Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, 'The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys. And in them let my name be carried on, and the name of my father Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth.' When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, 'Not this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.' But his father refused and said, 'I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations.' So he blessed them that day, saying, 'By you, Israel, will pronounce blessing, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh.' Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, 'Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you, and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you, rather than to your brothers, one mountain slope that I took from the land of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow.'" All right. So we come into this passage with a report coming to Joseph that Jacob is ill. And when I was researching this, one commentator made a good point. He said that even though we don't see an official summons from Jacob for Joseph to bring his two sons, this must have been a part of the report to say, hey, bring your two sons with you. It kind of seems too coincidental that Joseph would just feel like he had to bring his sons, and that Jacob just happened to see them, and then on the spur of the moment decide to adopt them and bless them. So either the report also said to bring the two sons, or on a previous occasion, this plan may have been discussed between Jacob and Joseph, thinking that this would probably be the plan when he came to the end of his life. And so if we just kind of thought this through, that explanation seems to fit. It seems pretty logical that Jacob probably said, hey, bring your sons too. It just flows smoothly. But if you know me by now, I'm more of a biblical literalist. What it says is what I think it meant to say. And so as it stands, it doesn't say, hey, bring your sons with you. So it almost seems like a coincidence on our end. But I believe the sequence of events were more God ordained. Joseph hears that his dad is ill, and like most family, even today, we bring our kids along to see them, right? We would do that even in our families today. So there doesn't have to be more to a report or even just a previous agreed upon plan for this to happen, or for it to be more true that he would just bring his kids along, as it were. Still, either way, it doesn't matter. I just thought I'd let you know what the commentator said and why I disagree with him. So, Jacob is told that Joseph is there, and he summons his strength and sits up in bed. And he's about to do an important work, right? He wanted to do this well. And so he gathers all of his energy, and he gets ready for what he's about to do. And then Jacob recalls how God has worked in his life, how he appeared to him in the land of Luz, in the land of Canaan. And remember back from Genesis 28, that Jacob was in a place called Luz. He had a dream of a ladder going from the earth to heaven and realized that God was in that place. And so do you remember what he named that place? It's probably the well-known name that we all know. Yeah, Bethel. So he named that place Bethel. But it wasn't until chapter 35 that God commanded Jacob to go back to Bethel. And there God appeared to him, blessed him, and gave him the covenant that Jacob repeats here in verse 4. And the focus of the covenant was on descendants and a permanent possession of the land. Now notice that it is God who will make this covenant come to pass. He says this in verse 4. I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a company of peoples. This isn't, you will make yourself, or you will do this, or you will do that. It is, I will make this happen in you. So God will fulfill this himself, just as he will give the land to him as well. And so the transition from these two verses of describing what God has done to verse 5, where Jacob adopts Joseph's two sons, is based in the covenant of God. Since Jacob is to multiply greatly in numbers, he sees Joseph coming back from the dead and having two sons at that as being a fulfillment or a partial fulfillment of this covenant. See, God has restored a branch that Jacob had thought was cut off. And not only has he restored it, but he has made this branch produce more branches. See, God is multiplying the descendants of Jacob. But I think there's another reason why Jacob is actually adopting Ephraim and Manasseh here. Look at what Jacob says about Joseph's sons in verse 5. Where were they born? In Egypt. And when were they born? Yeah, before Jacob came to Joseph. Now remember that the culture that they're in, okay, the Hebrew culture that will go on for a millennia afterwards, they put a lot of stock in descendants, lineage, and being able to trace their ancestors back, right? Joseph's two sons were at a risk of being cut off completely from the people of Israel. They could have been treated like Ishmael and his descendants, or like Esau and his descendants. Their mom, Joseph's wife, was an Egyptian. Not among the people, not among their people. So just like Ishmael and Esau married Canaanite women and not from among their people, so too did Joseph marry someone from not among their people. And so they had this, they could have had this stigma about them. And so Jacob is saying that they're not going to just be these loose appendages that are going to be cut off. They are full-fledged sons of Jacob, on par with his two eldest sons, Reuben and Simeon, and I think they're just used as examples. They're not replacing them here. But by adopting them, their status would never be in question. And so I don't think Jacob is trying to just take away Joseph's sons. I think he's trying to protect them. and Joseph's lineage in the future by adopting them. And he's also ensuring their share of the inheritance of the land that is promised to Jacob by God. But there is another passage that we'll look to here in a second, because Jacob makes a provision for future sons of Joseph as well. He says, if you have more sons, they shall be yours. Verse 6, and the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. We don't have any knowledge of any further sons born to Joseph, at least not that I could find in my research. So this apparently remains unfulfilled. But still, Jacob is just bringing these two sons into the fold. And then, by this time, I was about to say that soon, but I'm thinking they're about 20. Because when Jacob came to Egypt, he said that he was 130 years old. And then we find out here in a little bit that Jacob is going to pass away at 147 years old. And so at least 17 years have passed between him coming to Egypt and him about to pass away here. So I'm guessing about 20. Most commentators guess about 20. So Jacob shows a further motivation for adopting Joseph's sons. Not only are they adopted because of God's promise to make Jacob fruitful, but also because of Rachel. Rachel, his beloved wife, who he anticipated having more children with, but he couldn't because she died prematurely. And so Jacob recalls her death, and he recalls his grief. He had naturally wanted, if we remember back, he naturally wanted Rachel to be his only wife. Laban tricked him. He ended up having Leah and Rachel. So Rachel's sons would have been his firstborn sons. And so by adopting her son's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they received the birthright of the firstborn. So let's look at another passage. Let's go to 1 Chronicles 5, 1-2. 1 Chronicles 5, 1-2. For context, who wants to read all of chapter 4? Yeah, I'm just playing with you. 1 Chronicles 5, verses 1 and 2. Let's look at it together. The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's couch, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that he could not be enrolled as the oldest son. Though Judah became strong among his brothers, and a chief came from him, yet the birthright belonged to Joseph. So before we talked about how Reuben's sin had consequences, and we're going to look at that again in the next chapter of Genesis. But we see here that Reuben's sin had consequences. Next would have been Judah, Simeon, and Levi. Their sin had consequences. We'll see that in Genesis 49. Judah became important in his own right. Through him comes David and Jesus. But the birthright was given to Joseph and his sons. Now the birthright said that the portion of the firstborn always was a double portion compared to everyone else. And so here in Genesis then, Joseph in his two sons is actually receiving a double portion. So come back to verse 8 then of chapter 48. Everything is ready for Jacob to bless the children. He has explained why he intended to do so, and with that foundation laid, he only has to follow through and do it. But we come up on a situation that should immediately, I think, remind us of Isaac blessing Jacob. Look at verse 10. How is Israel's sight described? Dim. He's essentially blind. Saying his eyes were dim meant that he could probably make some things out still. Things were just a bit fuzzy. But if you look back in verse 8, we're told that he did see Joseph's sons, but what was his question? Yeah, whose are they, right? Who are these? He couldn't make them out exactly. He wanted to be sure about who they were. So I wonder if Jacob thought of how his dad couldn't see and how he asked about who he was. And maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe that's why he asked Joseph to bring his kids close to him, and Jacob kissed them and embraced him. More than just, feeling the hair on the arm. He's like, nope, come right here. I'm going to smell you and feel you and everything to make sure I know who you are. Now, of course, Jacob had no reason to expect deceit, right, from Joseph or the sons. But did Isaac really have reason to expect deceit from Jacob either, right? Anyways, even if he did have cause to think about how he got his own birthright, Israel now knew how God was working in his life all along. And so he gives God praise that even though at one point he never hoped to catch even a passing glimpse of Joseph's face, he not only gets to see his face, but his grandson's faces as well. And so I think these are just words of praise. He's just worshiping God. He has praise and contentment in his heart. So look at verse 12. Verse 12 tells us that Joseph removed his kids from Jacob's knees. I don't think that they'd been sitting on his knees as we might imagine, because by now Manasseh and Ephraim are about 20 years old. And so it's more likely that they were standing on either side of his knees when he embraced them. And Joseph wanted to show his gratitude to his dad for the favor that he's about to bestow upon them. And so he first had his sons move away, and they bowed to the ground. This was their way of showing just respect and honor and thanks in their culture and in their day. And so after doing that, Joseph takes his two sons and he guides them according to the rights and advantages of the firstborn. He brings the oldest son, Manasseh, to the right hand. The right hand was the hand of power. And the youngest son, Ephraim, he brings to the left hand. And what does Israel do? Cross his hands. You see, our physical nature gives us no advantages in God's kingdom. God operates on free grace, and he has from the very beginning. Isaac was preferred before the older Ishmael, Jacob before Esau, and now Ephraim before Manasseh. So too was Moses before Aaron, David before any of his brothers, and even fishermen, tax collectors, and zealots before teachers of the law and rulers and authorities. In fact, it's interesting to think about why Judah may have been chosen for David and Jesus to come through. Judah is the youngest of the original first four sons of the rejected wife. So he is the absolute last person we would probably expect a royal lineage to come from. But God operates differently than we do. He isn't the youngest of... Leah had 6 sons, by the way. He's not the youngest of them, but the youngest of the first 4. Still, the truth of grace over our own efforts and strength has been around from the very beginning of time. And I like to point that out in Genesis. Some people think, well, grace, that just began in the New Testament. No, it's all the way back here in Genesis. We just have to be aware of it when it's happening. If there's one thing to walk away from our study on Genesis with, it's that. God has always operated in grace, and he shows it here again by guiding Jacob to cross his hands. But notice at the start of verse 15 that the blessing, although given to the sons, was directed to Joseph. In blessing his sons, he blessed and purposed to bless Joseph. The blessing begins, I think, rather majestically by addressing God first. He uses the term Elohim. And here it has the definite article in the Hebrew. It's Ha Elohim. And used in this way, it means the true God. And so Jacob says, the true God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the true God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day. So when Jacob describes the true God as the one before whom his fathers walked, he is saying that to know the true God, we have to know him in relationship to how he interacted with Abraham and Isaac. He's not a God apart from them. He's interacted in their lives. And so Jacob knows God as one whom his forefathers knew intimately and whose faith in him was living and vital. And then he describes God as a shepherd. And in the Hebrew, The verb form shows that he means that God is still shepherding. Jacob himself was a shepherd, and so he understood the kind of care God gave to his sheep. This is how Jacob could testify that this occurred throughout his entire life. And this is the first reference in the Bible to God as a shepherd. And so when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, he is referencing something from the very beginning of time. Now the next line of the blessing mentions an angel who has redeemed Jacob from all evil. And this is where people like myself, who are biblical literalists, can come into tension. And here's why. The word used in verse 16 is the word for angel or messenger. In the Hebrew, it's like I said, angel or messenger. We've just seen the author of Genesis, who is most likely Moses, who used the word for God, and now he used the word for angel. So if he meant God who redeems him, he would have used the word God, right? Because he knows the word God and he just used it. But he doesn't use the word God, he used the word angel. And yet the way this is set up, he seems to be talking about God. This third line is structured the exact same way the two prior lines are structured. Grammatically, we should understand this to be referring to God. Also, what Jacob says the angel has done is something that only God can do. Angels cannot redeem someone from evil. Only God can do that. And only God can sovereignly do that over the course of a person's lifetime, which is what Jacob is talking about here. It's what he has in view when we look at that third line and the second line of this blessing. And finally, the word for redeemed is in the participle form. You don't need to know that. You just need to know that I know that. A literal translation of that would be the redeeming one. And it gives us the understanding one who is continually redeeming or who still redeems. It's a constant redemption that's happening here. Jesus is constantly referred to as our Redeemer in the New Testament, and it's only him who still redeems and continually redeems even through today. And yet, I fight against this because the Hebrew word can only be translated as angel or messenger. And so that's where the tension comes from. Now, some people, in kind of my camp, try to resolve this by saying that the angel only tells of God's redemption. It is only a messenger of what God has done. But that's not also what the Hebrew says here. It says the angel who redeems. It's not saying the angel who shares the message of redemption. It is the angel who does the redeeming. So all of that to say, for me, this is an instance where what's in the Bible and what is theologically true causes me to interpret and understand this as referring to God, specifically Jesus. This doesn't mean that I reinterpret every other reference to angels or the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament as referring to Jesus. I take each one on a case-by-case basis. But this one, I think there is ample evidence to understand it in that way, that this is referring to Jesus redeeming Jacob, or God redeeming Jacob, and that the word angel is just meant to refer to him. It's okay to disagree with me on it, but I'll give you a chance now that I've explained it all. Any pushback or other explanation? I tried to give you all the facets of this problem. So if that was information overload, I apologize. So all that to say, what I'm saying here is when Jacob says in verse 15, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, he's referring to God. When he says in the second line, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, he's referring to God. And in verse 16, when he says the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, I still believe he's referring to God, not to just a random angel who is able to redeem, because we don't have any evidence of angels being able to redeem. Yeah, and when we talked about that, Gracia asked if it could be referring to the angel that Jacob wrestled with. And when we talked about that, the question is, was it an angel or was it God? When Jacob refers to the angel as God, that's another instance where I'm like, even though it says angel, because it referred to him as God, I believe it was God. So, yeah. There's other times, though, when we talked about the angel, when the three visitors came. It just said three visitors, right? But then later, he's talking to God about Sodom and Gomorrah. So, yeah, I don't always read Jesus back into the Old Testament, depending on exactly what's in the Bible. But like I said, in this instance here, I think there's ample evidence to say, yeah, he's either referring to Jesus or to God. So, in any case, after this threefold call to God, what's Jacob's simple request at the start of verse 16? Right after he says all this, he says what? Bless the boys. He puts it at the end of this introduction. This request for blessing is just a request to bless them as Jacob has been blessed. That God would walk with them as he walked with Abraham and Isaac. That God would shepherd them all of their lives like he did with Jacob. And that he would redeem them from all evil. In addition, he prays that his name and the name of his forefathers be upon them. The word name signifies character in this case, and Jacob prays that Ephraim and Manasseh express the true patriarchal character and be conscious of the responsibilities that are involved in that. And finally, he asks that they multiply on the earth, and that again just recalls the covenant that God says that he will accomplish in their life. Now, everything has been recorded just as it happened. Okay, so we move on to verse 17. The two men are placed before Jacob. He crosses his hands, he places them on their heads, and he immediately begins to pronounce his blessing. But verse 17 shows that Joseph noticed that Jacob crossed his hands, and what was Joseph's reaction? Didn't like it, right? He was displeased. He tries to correct it. The phrase in the ESV, it displeased him, from the Hebrew, is literally, it was evil in his sight. And so as Joseph tried to physically correct it, he also tells his dad that the firstborn was supposed to receive the blessing. But I think Joseph was assuming that Jacob was confused. But was Jacob confused? No. He knew exactly what he was doing. And then he proceeds to tell exactly why he did it. Manasseh would become a people, and he would be great, but Ephraim would be greater. Now there's two censuses, whatever the plural is. There's two of them taken in Moses' day. Numbers 1 records Ephraim at 40,500 people, and Manasseh at 32,200 people. And Numbers 26 records Ephraim at 32,500 people, and Manasseh at 52,700 people. So by the end of Numbers, Manasseh actually has more descendants than Ephraim does. So Moses preserves a prophecy here from Jacob, which in his day had not yet been fulfilled. And I like that because again, when people try to say that the Bible is fake, you would think that Moses would sit there and be like, see how this was fulfilled in my lifetime? No, he records things accurately and truthfully. Still, Joseph had interrupted the blessing, but Jacob was not done saying it. So after gently repelling Joseph's suggestions, he continues to state that these two tribes will be so greatly blessed that over time they'll become proverbial for blessing and will be the formula that will be used for blessing. And even in this blessing, God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob still continues to put Ephraim first, not God make you as Manasseh and Ephraim. Now the Jewish people continue to use this formula for blessing to today. And it's important to note here that this event that is happening here, this blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh, it's referenced in Hebrews 11, often known as the faith chapter. Hebrews 11:21 says this: "By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff." Now we don't see his worship recorded in Genesis 48. We do see it at the end of 49. But we do see that the blessing he gave them is an act of faith in God, that God would continue the covenant that he had given Abraham and Isaac and Jacob into the next generation. And so after blessing his sons, Jacob has something specific for Joseph. He knew his death was at hand. He states that fact, I think, kind of calmly. But he leaves Joseph with the assurance that Egypt is not the land of their destiny. And Joseph is going to share that exact same message to his brothers in a couple of chapters. So God in his power will bring his people back to the land of the covenant. But Jacob has one last thing to give to Joseph. He gave something that he had the right to give. It was a special slope, apparently, that he took in battle. That battle is not recorded anywhere in Scripture. So a lot more happened in Jacob's life than what was recorded in Scripture. But the slope comes back in John 4, verse 5. Jesus is about to rest at a well and talk to a Samaritan woman. And we read this in John 4, verse 5. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. So that field that Jacob is giving to Joseph is the one where Jesus stopped and revealed that he was the Messiah to the Samaritan woman. Yeah. So, coming to the end of this chapter, a few things stand out. As Joseph looks back, as Jacob looks back on his life, he could see how God had worked in and through his life. God has guided him and cared for him. And it may have been hard to see that in the moment, but in retrospect, God had been faithful. And so this chapter reminds us of God's faithfulness. The crossing of his hands reminds us that God moves by grace. Even if someone is born with rights and privileges, it doesn't matter. Spiritually, we are all equally sinners and all equally in need of God's grace. God shows throughout the Bible that he reverses what people think how the world should work out, and that we shouldn't put our trust in the wrong things. We should put our trust in God, not in what we believe our inherent rights are. So this chapter reminds us to trust in God and that he is a God of reversals. And finally, the first three lines of Jacob's blessing, recorded in verses 15 and 16, I think give us three lessons in quick succession. First, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. We are called to live our lives in accordance to what God wants. The God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day. We're reminded that God is our shepherd, that we will not be in want. He makes us lie down in green pastures. He leads us beside quiet waters. He restores our soul, and so on. And the angel who has redeemed me from all evil. Jesus is our Redeemer who saves us and brings us into a relationship with God. And so this chapter reminds us that God is our Redeemer, and he is our shepherd, and we should live according to his ways. And I think that's a lot of theological meat here, just not only in this chapter, but we're seeing throughout all of Genesis, and we'll see throughout all of the Old Testament. There's a lot of theological meat in it. So I want to encourage us to continue studying it. Any other thoughts, comments, or insights into this chapter? All right. I will see you next week. We'll get into Genesis 49. Thank you. Have a good night.